Welcome everyone, I'm Alyssa. In this series, we're making delicious, versatile, and easy to prepare recipes. For this one, I'm gonna be making my squash and sausage skillet. It's absolutely delicious and it's punched up with the extra sage Nice's country sausage. So part of the beauty of this dish is that everything can be prepared inside one pan. This is my largest, widest cast iron skillet. It's perfect. I'm gonna start to layer in flavors from the squash, and then I'm gonna be adding in the sage sausage from Nice's. That's gonna add a lot of flavor, also paired with some white beans and some kale that's really gonna brighten it up. So I'm gonna start by breaking down these two different types of squashes. I have butternut and acorn. And the butternut tends to be a little bit sweeter, the acorn squash a little bit more mild, but you can choose any combination that really works for you. I'm gonna start with just trimming off the top on the butternut, and then I like to use a peeler to get all of the outside off. And I'm using a nice wide ribbon peeler. This I find is the best for this task. But breaking it down and cutting it up versus buying something pre-cut is really where you're gonna find so much depth of flavor. I'm gonna cut this into rings for this smaller neck of the squash. And as soon as I get close to where that neck starts to open into the base, I'm just gonna turn it onto its flat side and cut through. And then you can use a spoon to scoop out the seeds. Just gonna place these on a sheet tray so that they're organized and ready for me to use. And next, I'm gonna break down my acorn squash. First, you're gonna just cut through the top part. There we go. And now you have a flat side. So you're gonna cut it in half, and you'll wanna scoop out the seeds on this one as well. Now you definitely wanna peel this squash, and one of the easier ways I find to do that is go ahead and pre-cut my slices. Because of these ridges, it makes it really difficult to get that peeler in there. So now these slices are a little more manageable. I've got quite a bit of squash here. Likely I'm not gonna use more than what will fit inside this skillet, but if I'm already doing the job of breaking down a whole squash, I like to go ahead and do it, and then I can roast off the extra pieces. I could freeze them and puree them and add them to a soup, but there's a lot you can do with it. So I've got my squash peeled, sliced, and ready to go. And to start things off, I'm gonna cook my sage sausage. So I'm gonna turn that on to about a medium-high heat. So I'm gonna put a little clarified butter in the pan just to get things started. And I'm first gonna cook the sausage, and then when I take that out of the pan, I'll have built up a lot of flavor to go ahead and caramelize the squash in the pan as well. I love the flavor of this extra sage country sausage from Nice's. I'm so glad they have it out there as an option. I've used it in so many things, from stuffing on Thanksgiving. I've used it to top some soup. It just works so well. I'm gonna add a little pinch of salt. And now that it's nice and browned, I'm just gonna spoon it out and put it into a separate bowl. I'm using a slotted spoon so that way I can leave behind any of the excess oil that did cook out. So now that my pan is clear, I can use this to cook the squash. I'm gonna put in just a little bit more clarified butter. I'll cook the butternut squash first, and then I'll follow with the acorn squash. I do have a few ingredients that are gonna go into this dish once the squash is done, so I'm gonna go ahead and prep those. So for the next layer of flavor in this dish, we're gonna be cooking a shallot, and that's gonna help to provide some acidity and some extra flavor in order to add the kale and the white beans, and that will really just bring it all together. So I'm gonna start with mincing up the shallot. So now that my shallots are ready and minced up, I can start slicing up my kale. The kale is my choice, but you could certainly use lots of different kinds of greens, from collard greens to Swiss chard. But the kale that I'm using, I'm gonna rib. You just hold on the side and then pinch your fingers and pull in the opposite direction. My butternut squash is looking beautifully caramelized, and I'm gonna just flip that over, let it go a little longer on the other side. And although this dish has quite a few ingredients going into it, they all complement each other really well. So after about 6 or 7 minutes, this is gonna be nice and fork tender. Perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these out of the pan and just place them on a flat surface. Next, I'm gonna add my acorn squash. So I'm gonna need just a little bit more of the clarified butter for that. So next I'm gonna slice up my kale. I'm gonna just take a handful of leaves at a time and just roll them up and try to bundle them together, and then just slice forward and you'll get a nice ribbon slice. And I'm gonna give my acorn squash a flip. I'm just gonna check to see that these are tender. Perfect. My pan's clear. It's time to cook the shallots and the kale. And I'm not adding any additional oil. I'm just using what's left over in the pan. I'm just gonna let these absorb some of the flavor in the pan and cook them till they smell nice and sweet and just the edges are starting to brown a little bit. Also a good time to hit it with a little salt. Using my wooden spoon again, I can kind of scrape any brown bits on the bottom. Next, I'm gonna add in my drained white beans. I just want those to warm up in the pan. And my next addition is the kale. Depending on how much you have and how wide your pan is, you might need to do this in a couple of batches. And I'm just gonna cook this until it wilts and turns like a bright forest green. Also going to, again, layer in a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And as the first batch wilts down, I'll add another handful. So make sure to season a little bit at a time every time you add another batch of your ingredients. And I'm just moving these and folding them around the pan with a pair of tongs so they cook evenly. I'm actually gonna turn off the heat in the pan so that doesn't overcook, and I'm gonna start to layer in my squash. Before I get to the last bit, I'm gonna start to put my sausage back in. There's one more element to top this off, and that's a little crust, and that's gonna get toasted in the oven. So I just set my oven to broil, and you're not gonna want this too close to the top heat element, so make sure you have a tray that's a little lower than the top rack. And I'm gonna build up a crust that's made of walnuts, Parmesan cheese, and some breadcrumbs. I want these walnuts pretty finely minced because the breadcrumbs are also pretty fine. Okay, so I'm just gonna add this into a larger bowl here. I'm gonna add in the Parmesan, the breadcrumbs. I've got a couple of tablespoons left of my clarified butter. I'm gonna toss everything together so that that butter coats and will evenly brown it in the oven. So now I'm gonna sprinkle this topping all over the top of my skillet. So now this is ready for the oven, and it's only gonna be in there for a few minutes. This dish comes together so quickly and it has so much flavor. So I hope you'll give it a try with the Nice's Extra Sage Country Sausage. And from my kitchen to yours, please enjoy.